To round off the conference for today, we are honored to have Dr. Margarita Pavlova, Director of Univoc Hong Kong Center, to give us the closing remarks.
Dr. Pavlova has more than 20 years of international work experience in education across Europe, Asia, USA, and Australia. Currently, she holds a position of visiting researcher at the Institute for Adult Learning, Singapore. Please join us in a big round of applause to invite Dr. Pavlova to come onto your stage.
How I will operate this. Sorry. Slides. Okay. Oh, okay. Easy. Good afternoon, everyone. I am really pleased to be here in summarizing our first day. I believe it was a really exciting and interesting event with a lot of sharing, with a lot of good examples of what's happening in different countries around the globe. But I think it is, of course, very challenging to summarize the points that have been raised by so many speakers today. So what I was planning to do is to reflect on some points, but with some twists and turns that relates to my research. So I think that today you might agree that a number of points that I listed here have been discussed by different participants. And the first, the most important one is the manpower and economic development and policies that relates to skills, partnership and the importance of different types of partnerships, governance of TVET system, purposes of TVET, and then also what is the links or the balance or a mix between occupation-specific knowledge and skills and generic skills, and also that we need to address TVET issues at different levels. So what I want to do is to reflect only on some points. Yeah. So the first one, economy and manpower competitiveness issues. I think that today a number of developments that relates to the future development of economy have been mentioned. And I want to refer to a megatrend as an analytical tool that a number of companies and researchers are using to identify what would happen to us in the future. And this is just one example of the megatrends identified by a particular company. So you can see that issues related to urbanization, climate change, demographic shifts, shifts in the economic power in terms of the regions, also technological breakthroughs were identified as a megatrend. And the megatrend, they're influencing different aspects of our lives, including skills. Okay. So one of the areas I'm particularly interested in is climate change, resources, sustainability, environmental impact. So I just want to provide some examples in relation to this megatrend. So you can see that our population is really growing, so our demand in energy, water, food is increasing. So that also impacts the types of occupations and the types of skills that would be required in the future. And one of the indication of this climate change is the amount of emission that we are producing. And you can see the historical chart here. And of course, industries are a big contributor towards that. And you can see that there is a particular composition in terms of industrial sectors that are influencing these emissions. And that means that we can do a lot to decrease it within our sectors. And another example that I have here is the environmental related jobs in several countries in our region. And you can see that different areas will be affected, or affected now, actually: agriculture, waste management, construction, forestry, manufacturing, tourism. All these areas can contribute towards the greening of economies and will contribute towards the composition of skills that are required now and in the future. And this is the example from Malaysia. So they decided that they will focus on green technologies. And now they actually export green technologies, and that contributes greatly to their GDPs. When we are talking about the industries and development of different industries, of course, that will reflect in what TVET should produce in the future. And I'm still using this term that UNESCO is using, Technical Vocational Education and Training, TVET, but of course in Hong Kong we moved to a different terminology. So you can see that, again, this analysis demonstrating us that by 2020, virtual conferences, a lot of industries that relates to digitalization actually will be playing a very important role. And today this has been mentioned for many speakers. Yes, that we are moving towards a different type of economy, this type of skills we need to develop. We need to think about the occupations that will be contributing towards these industries in the future. And one example is smart technologies. And you can see here just different levels, and then level 3 is when the technology is communicating with the feedback to us both ways. And here we can see smart cities, smart buildings, smart mobility, everything that relates to communication between us and technology. And of course, we have examples already, many examples, and that one I want to share is the forest city that is built in Malaysia. And this is a city of the future, and they're using a lot of high-tech solutions. And can you imagine what type of manpower are required to design these cities, and then to build them, and then to maintain them? So all these exciting developments that relates to one mega trend, that is climate change, is actually an illustration here. And so that means that traditional industries like construction should change. Yes, and you can see here the graph in terms of spending on construction in the region. In China is the leader here. And if we are looking at the green building sector in China, it's also a huge increase. But what the problem here is a skill gap. And today it was mentioned several times that we have some skills, but we also have unemployment, so we have a mismatch between what we have and what we need to have. So you can see some examples in terms of the mismatch, available talents that are not available in India, China, Japan, etc. And also the main barriers to invest in green buildings is actually the technological skills. And also there is a prediction here, the example of 3 countries, that the green jobs, or environmental friendly jobs that relates to construction, how it is increasing and what are the numbers in the absolute numbers. So again, a lot of studies have been done to predict what occupations will be required in the next 5 years. So our question is how TVET is responding in terms of that. Then in terms of required soft skills or transversal skills that were mentioned today several times, you can see that environmental awareness and sustainable development is among them. And then in terms of occupations that are in real demand now, you can see green building expertise professionals, and then quantity surveyors, safety engineers. And today we heard that in Hong Kong, architects is a new sort of developing area here, and you see it is in the first place in terms of occupations that will be required in the next 5 years. And of course, to respond to all these challenges, United Nations and many countries in the world, they signed this, developed this agenda that are summarized in the Sustainable Development Goals. And we all know that these 17 goals are really important for many countries. And to support the achievement of these goals, skills are required. So when we are talking about the future of skills and what is required, we need to look at it from different perspectives. Yes, so Sustainable Development Goals is one of the perspectives because this is a shared agenda for many countries in the world. Today also, it was mentioned several times the links between economic competitiveness and human capital, yeah, or development of human resources. And here just an illustration to show that when we're talking about different types of economies, you can see that the importance of human capital is rising. So when we're talking about the factor-driven stage, so this is the lowest level of economic developments of the countries, it is still a huge contribution, but it is like 16% compared to 24% when we're talking about the innovation-driven economy. Unfortunately, today we have been talking only about competitiveness and innovation index, but I think it is really important to talk about sustainable competitiveness index. And it became more and more popular in terms of measuring the success of the countries. And if you look at the data, you will see countries that are performing very well in terms of competitiveness might not perform well in terms of global sustainable competitiveness index. And here I pulled a number of countries from our region, so you can see who is on the top of the list, and so what countries are on the top of the list and what countries are at the bottom of the list. And actually, when we were doing a research supported by UNESCO Univoc in Bonn, we were looking at the green skills introduced in the curriculum. And there is a really strong correlation between the position of the country on this list and what's happening in terms of developing this greening skill and sustainability awareness through their curriculum. In terms of policy, and it was a big discussion today, I think it is clear that there is a need to invest in skills. And so in some countries, there is an investment from the government side, like Hong Kong, Malaysia, it was highly stated today. But in some countries, Switzerland, private companies are investing a lot, but the message is clear. Yes, we need to invest because the knowledge-based economy requires skills. And if we're going back about sustainable development agenda, many countries in the region, they have a very comprehensive policies in that regard. So what is required is a skill matching implementation of these policies. And this is the example again from our study in the region. We asked our partners to analyze the policies and analyze the training program that they have. So these policies would be realized. And this is the example from the Philippines. So after the analysis, they came up to the conclusion that they're not training people in the particular area. So as a result, they established this Green Technology Center to support any interested partners in learning about green skills and greening. The same situation in Vietnam. Government have great plans to set up high-tech agricultural zones, but again, the TVET should initiate new programs and scale up their training to be able to catch up with these policies. So when we're talking about the policies, educational policies, skill policies, it should be a clear link between the development policies and skill policies. And then we are talking about how we can address skills development. We definitely need to think about at the system level. And it was mentioned today several times. And here I provide example from green buildings. So if we want to make sure that our construction sector is getting greener, we need to look at different clusters of job and make sure that we have a provision for each cluster. And of course, we have different challenges. And you can see that this is the response of our parents in Hong Kong. We have actually a big-scale study, 6,000 kids were interviewed, and this is their perception, that their parents want them to go only to the university. So all these measures that have been presented to us in the morning session was really useful, yes, because they need to rebrand the image of vocational education here. But in Switzerland, again, it's not the case. So the point here is that when we're talking about the policies development, it should be contextualized, yes, and we saw examples from different countries today. So when we are talking about innovation, and again, that was the topic of discussion today, I think that one interesting example, again, from our studies in Hong Kong, we need actually to know to what type of companies we're preparing our students. Yes, and here you can see the example of 2 companies, and we ask them about the competencies that they are using to deal with different tasks and challenges. And you can see on the right, yes, a very traditional company when technicians are not expected to be innovative. But then we have an open innovation company here to the left, and you see technicians are actually expected to be innovative, to come up with interesting solutions. So when we're talking about innovation and when we're talking about TVET, we need to consider the type of companies that we have in our particular context and societies. So today also the last presenter was talking about the performance at the systems level. But I want to talk about the role of TVET and how we can measure the performance of TVET institutions. And it was mentioned briefly several times that for our TVET system, we are preparing students not only for the labor market, but for their other roles and purposes as well. Yes, so we need to think about the social impact, we need to think about sustainability impact, we need to think about global citizenship. So this is a chart developed by UNESCO Univoc in Bonn, and I don't know, Professor Shamal will be talking about this tomorrow or not, but I think it's a really good illustration to show that TVET is a very broad concept. So we're not thinking only about the labor market, but we're talking about the larger benefits to society. And in that regard, I want to share with you examples of the benchmarking tools that we used with a number of TVET providers here, just to see how they're doing in different areas beyond preparing students for the labor training. And you can see some benefits of doing that is listed here. And different forms of regional or local engagement, because we all know that now if you are working at the university, it's more and more important to demonstrate an impact. Yeah? Today we're talking about the applied science, applied learning at the technical and vocational universities. So now it's the same at the academic universities, we need to demonstrate an impact. So I believe that TVET is a really good resource for the society to demonstrate an impact. And here we used a benchmarking tool developed by our Glasgow colleagues, and that is the adjustment of the benchmarking that was developed for the higher education institutions. And you can see that there are 8 different domains, and I just want you to show one example of data that we collected. So you can see that the promotion of engagement within the institution, is it important? Is this agenda actually set within an institution? Is there someone who is overlooking after that agenda? Then human capital development, and this is probably one of the most important domain, and today we have been discussing mostly this one. But then we also have the development of regional learning and social capital, and we shouldn't forget about that. We also shouldn't forget about business development processes, and today we mentioned entrepreneurship, so this sits within this domain. But you can see how different this particular institution is performing on different domains and different categories within the domain. And then when we were debriefing, and talking about the results of the research, so they said that's actually really interesting data, because now in our planning, if we feel that this domain is important, we will put a particular effort to make sure that next time our measurement will be better. So basically they decided to use it as an internal tool for their improvement. And then you see community development processes, also extremely important domain, cultural development, very important. And then my passionate one, promoting sustainability, also seen and viewed by many institutions as an important domain. And then regional infrastructure planning and development. So you can see that performance at the institutional level, I think it should be really broad and comprehensive if we are talking about developing skills for the future and developing skills that are useful for the community. And today, the focus of all sessions were related at the high level, policy level, and then system level, but I can't miss on the providers, yes, on our institutions that we have in TVET, because actually based on their initiative, a lot of things are happening. And I just want to bring examples from some countries that are not so rich and for which maybe to do these things is really an effort, but they're still doing that because they believe it is important. And this is an example from Indonesia when they decided to build a green building. And they said it was so difficult for them because they can't find an architect firms that were able to design it. So they had a competition, and as a result, they had an input from European architect who modified the design so they could have this green building. Then another one, it is at the secondary school level. They're trying to make their school green, and it is not only in terms of plant, but it is also in terms of recycling and in terms of developing the particular products. And this is a very, very poor community in Sri Lanka, and here they're producing a biogas, yes, so they can use it in their canteen, so they have a closed loop economy, and this is actually the ideal economy that now we are talking about, yes, it's the economy that are not produce waste, but it is a closed loop, so the output of one process is an input into another process, and here they were thinking about that. And today, at the higher education level within TVET, we have been talking about research and development. But this one is an example of the secondary education TVET. And they also produce these green solutions for the local communities. So I think that really institutions have a great potential in achieving good goals that relates to sustainable development. And this is another example. They developed this electric tricycle to use in the Disneyland in Indonesia. And so students were developing skills as well as developing socially and environmentally sustainable products. Also, some interesting models generated by TVET providers, the production of green products for skills development, or establishing of the companies, because in some countries they find a real difficulty in identifying workplace for students learning. And today it was mentioned so many times that workplace learning is the most important area for our students if we want to have students with an adequate skills. So that was a creative solution, and also these startup companies for greening. So I think that I was trying to reflect on the major points that were highlighted today, but within the context of one megatrend, which is greening and sustainability. And I think that we all are looking for our day 2, that will be tomorrow. And I like this poster from the Marrakesh that was a COP22 banner, and it said it's action time. Yes, so when we are talking about the skills for the future, if we want to green our skills, this is a really action time. So thank you very much. And even I was given 15 minutes, 15 minutes to talk. They said, okay, time is unlimited. And I was thinking, okay, that's a benefit, yes, to present, to be the last presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pavlova. Please be seated. That is the end of the program today. The VPET Connex 2017 will continue tomorrow. Thanks again for joining us today. Have a good evening.